Right, so as you are no doubt aware by now, there's been an increasingly alarming escalation of conflict between India and Pakistan over the last few weeks, certainly conflict over the last several days. A ceasefire now thankfully coming into effect, though a shaky one, it must be said. Alleged violations of it having happened already, but like so many flashpoints, they didn't happen spontaneously, and there is historical lead up to these events, in much the same way that Israel and Gaza didn't begin on October 7th, 2023, but going back to 1967 and even further to 1948. We have a similar scenario here too, which I'll go into, but that doesn't take away from the fact a devastating terrorist attack struck the scenic town of Pahalgam in Indian-administered Kashmir, resulting in the deaths of 26 civilians, including 25 Hindu tourists and a local Muslim guide. The Resistance Front, the TRF, an offshoot of the UN-designated terrorist group Lashkar-e-Taiba, initially claimed responsibility, their reasoning based on those historic disagreements. It was an act of terror that reopened the festering wounds between India and Pakistan over Kashmir, though, and kicked off a dangerous escalation of violence between two nuclear nations. On top of that, the conflict that has followed has exposed numerous other underlying tensions, from the status of Kashmir to India's military alliance with Israel, Israeli munitions being used against Pakistan as India remained, despite the Gaza genocide, Israel's biggest defence buyer. With Israel, the global pariah it is, can peace truly hold between India and Pakistan if India are the sort of nation to still do business with such an entity as them, therefore? Right, so India and Pakistan with an undertone of Israeli involvement too. But let's take a step back a minute, because as easy as it is to just wade in feet first to what has happened in the here and now, to understand the current crisis, you do need to go back a little bit. You need to appreciate the broader historical and political context where it comes to India, Pakistan, and the allegedly most militarized region on the planet that is Kashmir. The region of Jammu and Kashmir has been disputed since the partition of British India in 1947. India, Pakistan, and to some extent China lay claim to different parts of this territory, as shown by this map. The pink bits being India-administered, the yellow Pakistan, and the green China. But all of it was basically semi-autonomous, acting as a buffer zone, if you like, between the three nations where their borders all meet. I say was. You see, in August of 2019, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government decided to revoke Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, which had granted Kashmir its semi-autonomy, which had been in existence since 1954. The region was then split and placed under direct Indian federal control, and this was a move that was met with condemnation both domestically and internationally. And referring to the area as a buffer zone, as I did a minute ago, does do the area a little bit of a disservice. You see, where India has sought to de facto integrate Indian-administered Kashmir into the Indian state directly, Pakistan supports autonomy for Kashmir and would like to see it become more independent. This is a mindset that also aligns with Kashmiri separatists as well, who saw this act of revocation by Modi as a provocation, as you might well imagine. Meanwhile, in Kashmir, local leaders were arrested en masse, curfews were imposed, internet services suspended, tens of thousands of additional troops ended up being deployed there. The Indian government's actions were widely criticised as a crackdown on civil liberties and an attempt to change the demography of the Muslim-majority region by encouraging non-local settlement. Modi's administration, him being Hindu, incidentally, if you weren't aware, has been marked for growing anti-Muslim sentiment and violence, and this incident certainly didn't help matters. Once again, another example of Muslims and Hindus being put at odds with each other by the Indian government in effect. So this is the background leading up to last month, where an attack on Hindu pilgrims visiting Bizaran Valley shocked the world not just for its brutality, but for the timing and the implication of it. The attackers, dressed as security personnel, stopped tourist vehicles and selectively killed Hindu tourists, along with a Muslim tour guide who tried to protect them. A tragic loss of life that was a reminder of the volatile nature of the region and the capabilities of the extremist groups that are very much still operating within or across the so-called line of control, the LOC, which is basically the de facto border between India and Pakistan through Kashmir. If I bring this map up again, it's basically the line between the pink bit and the yellow bit. It's comparable in a way, I suppose, to the blue line between Israel and Lebanon, as another for instance. India promptly accused Pakistan of backing the TRF, that group widely viewed as a front for Lashkar-e-Taiba, the UN-designated terrorist group that exists in the region. Pakistani Salafists as they are, so similar in their religious convictions, their religious extremism to al-Jilani's HTS, which now runs Syria, for example. They're also Salafists. The Pakistan government denied any involvement and instead have called for a neutral international investigation into the attack, which is hardly the actions of a guilty party trying to hide evidence, is it? Just look at Israel when it comes to asking them about an independent investigation into October 7th by comparison. Nevertheless, Indian authorities remained adamant in their assertions that Pakistan itself were the culpable party. And the fallout has been, as we've seen, swift and severe. India suspended the Indus Waters Treaty, which was a landmark agreement governing water sharing between the two nations, which threatens Pakistan's agricultural economy. Diplomatic ties were further strained as India expelled Pakistani envoys and imposed trade restrictions. In retaliation, Pakistan shut its airspace to Indian flights and formally suspended the Simla Agreement, which had underpinned bilateral engagement between India and Pakistan since 1972, a literal peace treaty, and then all hell broke loose. Militarily, the situation did escalate rather rapidly. The Indian government authorised Operation Sindoor, a large-scale military offensive, missiles being fired into Pakistan across the LOC, which began on May the 7th. Meanwhile, Pakistani forces retaliated, resulting in intense exchanges of fire. Notably, India granted its forces complete operational freedom in Kashmir, which was a move that alarmed international observers for the carte blanche it gave Indian troops in a region that's already fraught with human rights abuses, already hotly contested, especially since India removed Kashmir's special status back in 2019. One of the most alarming developments was the aerial dogfight that was observed on May the 10th, which was reportedly the largest seen in the world since World War II, saw somewhere in the region of 100 aircraft engaged from both sides. Though neither country officially confirmed the total losses, unverified reports suggest multiple downed aircraft and casualties. But during another conflict just a couple of days before that, reports emerged that India had deployed a fleet of Israeli drones for reconnaissance and targeted strikes along the LOC. The Pakistani military claiming it shot down something like 29 of the Israeli-made Harop drones at a cost to India in the region of some $17.5 million, all part of the close military ties between India and Israel that exist, India being Israel's largest arms buyer. In 2024 alone, India accounted for over 40% of Israeli arms exports. Yeah, 2024. Very much during the genocide of Gaza, therefore. And that has drawn further intense criticism aimed at India, given the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, where Israeli military operations have very much been labelled a genocide by multiple human rights organisations. And again, it brings Modi's attitude towards Muslims into question once more as well. While much of the world has begun distancing itself from Israel, right now at a rate not previously seen, as even Donald Trump is turning his back, it would appear, for 5 minutes. We don't know how long it'll last. He's rather unpredictable, isn't he? This news about Israeli drones news being used against Pakistan has thrust India's relations towards Israel into the public eye again at a time it possibly couldn't be more damaging. Human rights advocates and political analysts have questioned the moral implications of India supporting a regime facing global censure for potential war crimes. The use of Israeli drones in operations against Pakistani forces and potentially even against civilians in Kashmir. Again, investigation required versus such allegations. But they've all compounded these concerns further. India's alignment with Israel is being increasingly perceived, as it should be, as deeply immoral and unethical. After that massive dogfight, though, a ceasefire did come suddenly and rather unexpectedly. Trump announcing it as he did, so as to get the praise for it, you know what he's like. But it wasn't just US pressure involved. Various Gulf states, including Oman and even Iran, were apparently involved along the line here as well. Despite the ceasefire, violations were reported within hours, of course. Shelling and sniper fire has been exchanged allegedly across the LOC, with both nations accusing the other of provocation. There's very little trust here. And the terms of the ceasefire, which are largely verbal, really need tightening up to hold, if they're ever going to, in my view. Meanwhile, Pakistan's call for that independent international investigation into the Pahalgam attack has been met with silence from New Delhi. India maintains that it was incontrovertible proof of Pakistan's involvement and sees the investigation demand as a stalling tactic, which is something not dissimilar to Netanyahu's views of an independent investigation into October 7th being a Hamas delay and tactic. Pakistan, on the other hand, argues that its sovereignty and its credibility require an impartial assessment to prevent escalation based on misinformation. It really isn't the verbiage of a guilty party, is it? Of course, those who suffer most are always the ones that are caught in the middle. This latest conflict over Kashmir has taken a serious toll. Reports from the region speak of displaced families, civilian casualties, and destruction of infrastructure. In Pakistani-administered Kashmir, Indian shelling killed at least 13 civilians and injured 50, as per local official reports. The economic consequences have also been substantial, because amid fears of a protracted conflict, global markets reacted with volatility, and that came despite the IMF having approved just before all this kicked off a $750 million loan to Pakistan, triggering criticism from Indian policymakers who accused the fund of indirectly supporting a country alleged to harbour terrorists. So it was applied for to help offset the damage of climate change, of which Pakistan is particularly vulnerable, and to boost its economy as well, which has not been doing so well of late. Beyond South Asia, this standoff has wider global ramifications if it were to flare up again too. Any further escalation risks drawing in other regional powers, just as we've seen in the Middle East too. It's a comparable kind of geopolitical picture, including China and Iran, both of which have interest in Pakistan. China itself in Kashmir as well, both nations sharing borders with Pakistan as they do. Additionally, Israel's increasing involvement through arms deals with India complicates the equation as well, linking South Asia's conflict with the broader instability in the Middle East, so it all spreads that much further. The Pahalgam terror attack was a despicable act that deserves universal condemnation, but also requires not war, but investigation to ascertain the truth, to find the guilty parties. Peace may frankly depend on it, especially if it turns out this was a terror attack by a terror group that has instigated such widespread volatility between two nuclear nations, let's not forget. Responding to terrorism through military strikes and regional authoritarianism, as seen in India's handling of Kashmir, only drives and deepens cycles of violence, and that's a political mess all of Modi's making. Meanwhile, speaking of nuclear powers, or not, as the case may be, Israel's lies about Iran and its nuclear threat recently collapsed quite hilariously on live TV. The spokesperson doing the flailing is apparently in the mix to become the UK's next Israeli ambassador at that too. Get all the details of that mess in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as supporting the channel at the very same time, which is much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.